Hey guys, and welcome back to our emotional eating series. My name is Dani Taylor and I'm the owner of Vegan Proteins and the co-founder of Team Plant Built. And today we're going to talk about the mindset when you struggle with emotional eating or binge eating. So if you've been following along with this series, you sort of have all your ducks in a row. You've made sure you're eating enough. You've made your environment appropriate for paying attention to your food. You're trying to minimize stress, get enough sleep, drink enough water. You have some tools in your pocket for when binge urges come up. So we have some tools to learn to distract ourselves from these urges, but we haven't really talked about the mindset of overcoming emotional eating or binge eating. And I actually had a different video planned for today. Similar, but different. A good friend and teammate of mine, Anastasia Zinchenko, came out with her book this week called Food Obsession. It's an ebook. It runs very parallel to everything we've been talking about here. So I know I started this series and said, I'm not gonna try to sell you anything, and I'm kind of not, it's not my book. But if you're getting a lot out of this series, I would so recommend getting Anastasia's Food Obsession book. There were like aha moments in that book for me as somebody who basically has a completely healed relationship with food. There were still some things in there that I thought like I was the only one who did that, or I had been the only one who felt that way. And to hear her, another very intelligent vegan athlete and scientist, say that, she had some of these same weird thoughts, feelings, and behaviors was kind of eye-opening for me. And sometimes it can just be nice to hear something in a different voice. Sometimes you hear a different voice and something clicks that maybe didn't with the first voice, or vice versa. Science Strength is her name on Instagram. Totally follow her. And I think you would get a lot out of this book. But one thing that she talks about in the book a lot is the mindset that you need to overcome these types of behaviors. And what I found for myself, once I had all of these pieces in place to make sure that I wasn't setting myself up to binge eat, was that I had realized, like, man, this is just a really bad habit that I've formed at this point. Like, I had become almost addicted to the habit of overeating or binge eating, like in secret at the end of the day, to kind of wind down. And I would never say out loud, oh, I'm really looking forward to this, but like deep inside, I was kind of looking forward to it. And when I first started to try to resist those urges, like I mentioned in the last video, they would happen many times throughout the day. But what I didn't mention in the last video is the number of times my brain would try to trick me into thinking that eating was the right thing to do in that moment, even though I knew I didn't really want to. I think sometimes the smarter you are, the more you can rationalize some really screwed up behavior in your own mind. And that happened to me a lot. I could convince myself of almost anything using logic and reason. And I had to really, really dig my heels in and be incredibly firm with myself. And I don't often advocate for a super tough love approach. I think there's a lot of steps that you can take before you get there that can vastly improve your situation. And we've talked about almost all of those already. What do you do when you've done everything right and you're still finding yourself doing these behaviors? Well, last week we talked about how this is where you kind of white knuckle it, find those distractions and get through it. But getting through it doesn't necessarily take into account the mindset that you may need to get through it. And I personally found the most success with just hardening up and telling myself that I wasn't going to do it anymore. So when my brain would start to rationalize, you should eat X because Y happened, or you should eat X because this reason. Like, I could list 1,000 things that I had thought at various points. And my clients often will tell me the same thing. Well, I did this because of this, and now I don't feel very good about it. So what do you have to do? You kind of have to make a deal with yourself before it even gets to that point that you're just not going to allow certain behaviors. And this may seem kind of unrealistic because nobody's perfect. And I often steer people away from this all or nothing mentality. Where you feel like you kind of screwed a little thing up, so you just screw everything up after that, which doesn't really make sense. So this can kind of sound contradictory to that, where I'm saying don't have an all or nothing mentality, but say you're not going to do it anymore and just don't do it anymore. because we're human, and you may make that deal with yourself and you may slip up. It might happen, but how you deal with it from there is what I'm talking about in terms of an all or nothing mentality. You don't want to say, well, I screwed it up, so I'll just screw everything up, but kind of telling yourself right out of the gate, I will not give in to binge urges. You know, I have my set meal times, which we talked about earlier. I have an understanding of portion control, which we talked about earlier. I'm sure to not let myself get too hungry, and I'm sure that I'm eating enough throughout the day to sustain myself. All of those things are set, but you're still reaching for food when you don't want it. Here's where you need to say to yourself, like, self, stop. You cannot do this anymore. Not self, you suck, you're awful, you blew it, what a piece of trash. I'm not talking about talking to yourself like that at all, but saying like, stop this behavior. Just, you're not gonna do it anymore. If somebody offers you food, no, that's not part of your plan. You're not going to do it. You know, at least until you get to the other side of these intense urges, because every time you give in to the urges while you're trying to break this habit, or in my case, addiction, I would go so far as to say that it was an addiction, at least until you break that addiction, that cycle of behavior, you need to be hard with yourself. You need to be firm with yourself. You don't look at somebody trying to quit smoking, they don't approach it and say, well, if I really, really want it, then I'll have one. You know, they say from the start, I'm done. I'm not smoking anymore. Like once they quit smoking, they quit smoking because they know that if they just have one, it's going to start the whole cycle back up again. So, you know, likewise with an alcoholic, they don't decide like, oh, I'll just have a drink if I really feel like it, because they understand what happens when they do that. And I think that binge eating or emotional eating is the same way. Where you can't give in to that urge until you are long past the addiction. And then on the rare occasions where you do give in to urges to emotional eat, it's more of what we would consider normal eating, because normal eaters, as we've discussed before, occasionally overeat. Normal eaters occasionally emotionally eat. That's okay. And normal eaters also occasionally skip a meal. Normal eaters occasionally undereat for the day. Like normal behavior is a little bit up and down, but there's no pattern or cycle of binge eating, of emotional eating, of undereating, of skipping meals. Like once you get into a cycle of any one of those things, you've exited normal eating behaviors and you're in one sort of extreme or the other, or both. So yeah, I think approaching yourself with a very hard up, I don't do this anymore, can be very helpful. And I will tell you one of, this sounds so silly, but when I was in the absolute throes of my eating disorder, like the worst that it ever was, and I was ready to throw in the towel and I didn't know how I was gonna get out of it, I said to myself one morning, I woke up and I said, today I'm gonna act like somebody that doesn't have an eating disorder. And it was just like, today I'm gonna pretend to be somebody who doesn't have an eating disorder. And that certainly wasn't the cure, but it helped so much to just try and put, the same way an actor would take on a role of, like in a movie, was the way I was taking on the role of a non-eating disordered person and how they would approach this situation and what they would do. And it literally got me through a couple of months with very few eating disordered behaviors, which was enough to prove to myself that I was capable of doing it. And I was able to sort of build on that with lots of other techniques and tips and tricks and help as well. So hopefully this video is helpful to you. Again, I totally recommend, if you've gotten something out of this emotional eating series, check out Anastasia's book. I plowed through it in the first night that I had it, and although it's a different tone than the one I use, very similar messages worded differently from a different perspective. And I just feel like there need to be more athletes talking about this stuff because it's a real issue. And yeah, I just really, really appreciate that she did it. And I think that if you're right there, if you're like almost there to being able to get past these behaviors, but like something is holding you back, go get her book, because she could say something that I didn't say that could just be the thing that pushes you over the edge into a more normal eating pattern and gets you to actually stop these behaviors for good. So hopefully this helps you guys. If you have any questions at all or any part of emotional eating that you would like me to cover, please leave it in the comments down below, because there's maybe 1 or 2 videos left in this entire series and then it's done for a while. But I would love to make sure that I hit all of the talking points that you guys want me to hit. And I think that's it. Have a great day. Bye.